and think that you just need to get it over and done with as soon as possible. The logistics of trying to consult the membership within a week are extremely hard to figure out unless it was a quick online ballot, but even then you'd have to whittle it down to the last two extremely quickly. So we wait for more details on exactly what happens.
Yeah, so Graham Brady just said that the new Prime Minister will be in place before the fiscal statement on October the 31st, which is obviously a crucial date. As you say, they would clearly like one candidate to emerge. Who is that going to be, though? How likely is that the whole parliamentary party can coalesce around one candidate?
It's unlikely, is the simple answer, Ben. This morning it seemed pretty much impossible to me, actually, when I was chatting to Tory MPs in Parliament. I mean, we should emphasise the reason that we keep talking about Conservative MPs is they are so influential at the moment. For the second time this year, they are going to play an absolutely key role in deciding who our next Prime Minister is, either whittling it down to the last two or choosing the person themselves. Can they coalesce around one person? At the moment, I think it's extraordinarily hard to see. The names doing the rounds already in my WhatsApp are Rishi Sunak. I think his supporters will inevitably argue that he came second last time and he got a lot of it right when it came to the dangers of inflation. That's what they will say. I think Suella Braverman, who resigned as Home Secretary yesterday, is ambitious and she may fancy a tilt at trying to be the candidate of the right this time. Remember that Liz Truss beat her to that mantle last time and that allowed Liz Truss to get into the final two. Penny Mordaunt, maybe. I know a lot of MPs have concerns that she's not been tested in a crisis situation before, so may not be the right person, but she's potentially someone that will be sitting in her office right now weighing up the options. Keep an eye on Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary. He didn't stand last time. I've been asking some of his allies within the past hour if he might stand. No answer just yet. Maybe that means they're weighing it up. Maybe we shouldn't read too much into it, but I think there will be some pressure on him to stand. I know that some of his cabinet colleagues have been making the case for him behind closed doors over the last few days. There are other names out there, Ben. I suspect Kemi Badenoch will have a think about it, given that she was popular with a lot of Tory MPs last time. Maybe the former Health Secretary Sajid Javid, but it's a long list, isn't it? There's no clear person there that would be a runaway favourite. I think my sense is that Rishi Sunak would be the favourite to get the most support among MPs simply because he did last time, but they will be very conscious that he is divisive, particularly among supporters of Boris Johnson, who thinks that he stabbed the former Prime Minister in the back when he resigned. And Boris Johnson, what about it? Maybe, just maybe, the former Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries is suggesting it already, that he's the only man with a mandate. I think it's unlikely, but unlikely things happen around this postcode a lot just now.
Chris Mason, our political editor, your colleague, asked Sir Graham Brady, it's all a dog's dinner, isn't it? And he said in reply, well, it's not a circumstance I would wish to see. I mean, clearly embarrassed, really, by this whole situation and wanting to get all of this done within a matter of days.
Well, look, I think Tory MPs feel quite humiliated by it, actually. The level of embarrassment I've picked up over the last few days, the level of feeling that this is just, the show has completely come off the road, there are no wheels left on the car, things are extraordinarily bad. I think a lot of them have given up, quite frankly, certainly among those I've spoken to in the last few days. I've spoken to ministers who are dusting off their CVs with a view to losing their seat and having to find something else to do. It is a complete mess. It is chaos. And I think the question that Tory MPs are going to have to face up to in the next few hours is how do they give the impression that they can move on from this? Can they give that impression? There will be a lot of people arguing that it's impossible. The Labour Party are already arguing that there needs to be a general election because the Conservatives have lost the mandate to govern, the ability to unite the party, that the division is just so bad that for the case of the economy and the country, it's time to move on. Other opposition parties will agree with that. SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon's been saying it, the Lib Dem leader Ed Davey as well. So there's a big challenge ahead for Conservative MPs over the next few days to get this done, to get someone else into this postcode, into this address, I should say, within the next week. And that person, Ben, will face an extraordinary situation, because a week on Friday, or maybe not a week, I've lost my dates, the 31st of October, whenever that is, that's the Monday, isn't it? That is going to be the state as things stand. That is the day that the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, is supposed to be giving a big update on how on earth the government is going to fill the massive fiscal black hole that has been run up with some of the plans that have been emerged over the last few weeks under Liz Truss. He's got a huge challenge, but before that, he's facing a new Prime Minister. They'll possibly only have 3 days to make sure their plans add up with each other's.
Nick, good to have you with us once again. Nick Early there, our chief political correspondent in a slightly drizzly Downing Street, also a Downing Street that has seen extraordinary moments in the last couple of hours, with Liz Truss announcing her resignation as leader of the Conservative Party. As Nick was saying there, a new Prime Minister should be in place within a few days once there has been that Tory party leadership contest. Let's go for more reaction back to my colleague Anita McVeigh at Westminster.
Ben, thank you very much for that. Yes, so by next Friday, the 28th of October, we're told that there will be a new Prime Minister in place. And you would think that one of the lessons of what's unfolded since Liz Truss became Prime Minister is that the Prime Minister of the day has to, above all else, enjoy the support of her or his parliamentary party. But we did hear there from Sir Graham Brady, chairman of the 1922 committee, that the membership will somehow be included in this decision-making process. Just a week, so a really fast timetable. Let's get some reaction now from Kirsten Oswald, SNP MP. Kirsten, thank you very much for joining me. You may want to just tuck yourself in ever so slightly as the rain pours down. First of all, just take stock for us about what's happened in the last couple of hours. I mean, obviously there were suggestions that this moment was coming. Still extraordinary to see.
It is extraordinary, and I suppose we could use that word to describe almost any number of events over the last weeks and months, actually, and perhaps it is extraordinary to see, but I think for a lot of people it's not before time. I think that there have been calls even from within the Conservative Party for the Prime Minister to go, and it is absolutely right that she has done so. But I think that there are an awful lot of unanswered questions remaining. We've heard about the desire from the Conservatives to have another Prime Minister in place within a week from now, and quite confusing to me ideas about how they are going to make that happen by consulting their members. But there's obviously a big elephant in the room there. There are people that should be consulted about who the Prime Minister should be, and that's the general public. That's what's missing here. This has been a real democratic issue, and it's getting a bigger one if there is a suggestion that we should simply accept another Prime Minister who we didn't vote for being imposed upon us.
But the bottom line is there is no mechanism to get to a general election. You want one, the Lib Dems have called for one, Labour is calling for one, but there isn't a mechanism to get to that point, is there?
Well, that actually is something that the Tory members of Parliament need to think about for themselves. They need to grow a backbone on this, if I might say so. It's not good enough that we have this continued chaos, this notion that we just slot someone else in to an office and that we all carry on. I mean, there are so many people who've been slotted into office recently. This is not how a democracy should work. Westminster is not working. It's not functioning at all. And I think particularly for people in Scotland who've not voted for a Tory government since 1955, to have yet another Tory Prime Minister who we didn't vote for imposed upon us after all the chaos and damage that Theresa May has, I beg your pardon, so many Prime Ministers that Liz Truss has wrought in her short tenure, I think is really a step too far. People are paying a heavy price with things like mortgages for the damage that she has caused.
I hope that everyone can hear us clearly over the sound of the rain, which is coming down heavily now. We'll do our best to make our that what was happening here was a recruiting sergeant for Scottish independence. I mean, to what extent do you think that's true?
I mean, I think anyone, whether in Scotland or anywhere else, actually looking at this shambles that we have had to deal with over the past weeks and months, would certainly very reasonably think that there must be a better way of doing things. And so it's no surprise that people in Scotland are looking at Westminster and saying, this is ridiculous, it's anti-democratic, it's chaotic, it's costing us money, it's damaging people's lives. Of course, there is a better way, and there absolutely is a better way. So, you know, I'm clearly of the mind that Scottish independence can't come soon enough. And I think that the chaos here really demonstrates for me and for so many others that we can do so much better than this.
If any other party, hypothetically, was looking for a new leader, do you think doing it in a week would be a pretty tall order?
I mean, it seems like a bonkers suggestion to me. I can't imagine how that's going to be a workable, properly organised, transparent contest. I would imagine that it will lead to a lot of questions from those who want to participate in the contest as well as those who support them. But again, I go back to the fact that most of the people asking questions about how proper this is and how democratic this is are going to be the people outside the Westminster bubble, who I think probably find it unforgivable that we have rammies in the lobbies, we have people's mortgages going up at really huge rates because of the actions of this government, and they don't have a say. That's not sustainable.
Kirsten Oswald, thank you very much. Kirsten Oswald there, MP for the SNP here at Westminster, focusing there on what her argument is, that this is not democratic for the Conservative Party to then appoint another Prime Minister. Obviously, we had Boris Johnson. He was elected, huge majority. When he was replaced by Liz Truss, that was a vote among the party's own MPs and the wider party membership. Now we're moving to another very truncated 1 week voting process, again among the party's MPs and membership, we're told, to choose another Conservative Prime Minister. A really, really short time frame. And Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 committee, who will be running that contest, saying that he will set out more details about how that is going to happen a little later on today. Obviously, he's got to go into fast forward, like the rest of the Conservative Party, in order to meet that time frame. And joining me now is, actually, I'm going to have a guest in just a moment, but I think I need to go back to the studio right now to my colleague, Ben Brown. Ben.
Yeah, Anita, thank you very much indeed, because we've had some reaction in the last couple of minutes from the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer. He has been saying there has to be an immediate general election in the wake of Liz Truss's resignation, saying after 12 years of Tory failure, the British people deserve more than this revolving door of chaos. Let's have a listen to what Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, has been saying in the last couple of minutes.
Well, what a mess. And this is not just a soap opera at the top of the Tory party. It's doing huge damage to our economy and to the reputation of our country. And the public are paying with higher prices, with higher mortgages. So we can't have a revolving door of chaos. We can't have another experiment at the top of the Tory party. There is an alternative, and that's a stable Labour government. And the public are entitled to have their say, and that's why there should be a general election.
Some sympathy for Liz Truss, her time in office pretty humiliating.
The damage that has been inflicted on the public through higher prices and mortgages is considerable. This is not a soap opera. These are real lives that are being impacted by the mess at the top of the Tory party. We've had this revolving door. We've had these experiments at the top of the Tory party. The public are entitled to choose between this utter chaos and a Labour Party which will stabilise the economy and have got a clear plan for growth, for living standards and for jobs of the future. We need a general election so the public can make their mind up about this utter chaos.
Isn't there an argument that a general election might actually prolong the instability to an outcome of that general election? Do we need more instability now, or just a chance for a clean state and just to stabilise the ship?
The risk at the moment is continuing with this chaos, not having a stable Labour government. So that's why there should be a general election. We can't just allow the Tory party to keep putting up the next candidate in the middle of this chaos. There is a choice. There's a Labour Party that's capable of stabilising the economy, has a clear plan, and the public are entitled to choose between that stable Labour government and this utter chaos of the Conservatives.
Are you ready for government? This is not the context you would have wanted to take over.
We are ready to form a government to stabilise the economy and implement a real plan for growth, for living standards, to help people through a cost of living crisis. And that's the choice now, a stable Labour government or this utter chaos from the Conservatives.
So that's the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, demanding an immediate general election. In the shorter term, though, let's just recap on what we've heard from Sir Graham Brady, who's chair of the Tory 1922 Committee of Backbenchers, who has been talking about how the leadership election is going to take place. And he has been saying that he expects a new leader to be in place by Friday, the 28th of October. And that is significant because it's just before the scheduled fiscal statement, which the government will be delivering on the country's finances on October the 31st. So a new leader will be in place, says Sir Graham Brady, by October the 28th, Friday, October the 28th. But exactly how that election is going to take place isn't quite clear. It depends on how many potential candidates there are. So watch this space on that. Let's go back to Anita McVeigh, who's just outside the Houses of Parliament. Anita.
Thanks, Ben. And I actually have the ideal guest with me to talk about the processes, what happens, the procedures from here on in. That's Senior Fellow at the Institute for Government, Dr. Catherine Haddon. Catherine, thank you very much for joining us. It was interesting to hear the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, characterise what's going to happen next, this one-week process to choose another Conservative leader and Prime Minister, as an experiment at the top of the Conservative Party. And he, along with other political parties, are calling for a general election. Members of the public have been getting in touch a lot recently to say, why isn't there a general election in these circumstances?
Yeah, the reason is because the Conservative Party don't want one, and they have, in theory, a working majority, so they're able to command confidence in the Commons, which is the key to being able to form a government. So in theory, you don't need a general election because you ought to have a stable government. The problem is, if they can't actually form stable governments, we have another failed governments, they can't manage to control the political party and get legislation through, then the pressure increases, and constitutionally, whether there's a confidence vote or not, the correct sort of outcome is for a general election, because you have to be able to form stable governments. That's the entire purpose of general elections, is to form a majority so that we can have stable government.
So even though we've just had what's unfolded over the last few weeks during Liz Truss's premiership, because in theory, as you say, the party commands a majority, that's why we're not having a general election, but presumably there are only a certain number of times that scenario could be allowed to unfold. Do you think if this happened all over again, that would be it, would be into general election territory?
Absolutely, and this is really the big question mark that the Conservative Party have to solve in the next week, because it's all very well saying we want anyone but Liz Truss now, having got rid of Boris Johnson before that. But they not only have to find somebody that is acceptable to them, and it is most important that it's acceptable to the the parliamentary party, so they may want to bring the membership into it, but if they don't have the confidence of the parliamentary party, you can't command confidence, you can't form a stable government. You have to get out of the way and call a general election or pass it over to the opposition. That's how the Constitution works. Those are the principles behind it. But it is very tricky without a sort of formal vote. We saw it last night. If that was a confidence vote, if it had fallen, then the question would be asked about having a general election. But because it wasn't, or because they managed to get through it, we are now in this situation today.
Yeah, so how do you think the party is actually going to do this in the space of a week, compared to the election campaign that we saw run through the summer, all those hustings, the best part of a couple of months?
Yeah. I mean, the leadership rules that we've got in place now are entirely because back in the day, 1963 and before, it would be, what was called the men in grey suits, but it would usually be men getting around together to decide who should be the next leader. And probably similar will happen at the moment. I don't think we heard from Graham Brady earlier about the threshold of being able to get onto the ballot paper.
We didn't know.
So they could put that very high. So only if you've got the support of 50, maybe more MPs, can you even get onto it. That would stop too many rounds going through. And it could be that actually enough MPs talk to each other, decide not to campaign, that actually it coalesces around one candidate, which is what happened in 2003. 3 with Michael Howard. That is their best chance of avoiding the membership getting involved and therefore rallying around a unity candidate. But there won't be a lot of people watching that have confidence they can do that.
Yeah, of course. Graham Brady can't predict that is going to be what happens, and therefore the membership might be involved. Just to repeat the point, it bears repetition, doesn't it? Clearly, we've seen with Liz Truss that the PM of the day has to command the respect, the support of a majority of the parliamentary party above all else in order to actually get on with the business of the day.
Yeah.
So do you think that this might be weighted in some way so that the parliamentary party's votes carry a greater weight than those of the wider party membership?
Yeah, I think that is one way of doing it. I think the question is, they talked about consulting them. I honestly don't know what they have in mind. I think perhaps Brady's hasn't worked out what the details will be.
Well, we haven't been in this sort of situation before,
exactly.
have we?
So they're trying to both give it a semblance of some kind of democracy with a small d within their party, but at the same time they're trying to find a quick workaround that allows them to solve this in what, the grey suits, as I say, think is the most sensible fashion. But it's hard to do when you've got a party that is so split into different factions and when there is so much blood in the water of people who are annoyed with other people and don't want them to be the leader of their party. So it's a real challenge for them as a political party, and a general election is something that needs to be sitting there as a threat if they cannot resolve this, because we do need stable government.
Dr. Catherine Haddon, Senior Fellow at the Institute for Government, thank you very much. Yes, really new territory for everyone in terms of the process unfolding over the next week. Just by next Friday, we're told that we are going to have a new Prime Minister, so just that short period of time to elect a new leader, but an election that happens, as we were just discussing, purely within the Conservative Party. For the moment, back to you, Ben.
Yeah, Anita, that's absolutely right. By next Friday, October the 28th, that is what Sir Graham Brady has said, the chair of the 1922 committee. We're still awaiting more details, exactly how that Tory leadership race is going to work. He was saying the expectation is that the Conservative Party members will be involved in the process. But that's assuming there are two contenders at the end of that process. And if there's only one contender, it wouldn't have to necessarily go to the wider party membership. But anyway, the expectation is the Tory party will have a new leader by October the 28th. And that's significant because it's just ahead of the government's fiscal statement, which is going to be on October the 31st on Halloween. And let's talk a bit about the markets, actually, and the financial markets with our business correspondent Theo Leggett and how they've been responding to this extraordinary day of politics. And of course, the markets have been instrumental in a way in the demise of Liz Truss. It all began with their reaction to the controversial mini budget of last month.
Absolutely, Ben. And there's a delicious irony here, really, that the markets which triggered this acute bout of political turmoil, this political crisis, have taken the departure of Liz Truss pretty much in their stride. We did see a spike in the value of the pound just before her announcement was made. It went above the $1.13, and the government's cost of borrowing has come down a bit as well. But it's been a relatively muted reaction. And I think there's a very good reason for that, which is that whoever comes into power as successor to Liz Truss will be hamstrung. They will not be able to come in with the kind of almost revolutionary policies that she came in with. She came in and the first thing she did was announce a sweeping energy subsidy programme. That had an open-ended cost. It was extremely expensive and it was open-ended for 2 years. Then off the back of that, she introduced the mini budget, or her Chancellor introduced the mini budget, which included some £45 billion worth of unfunded tax cuts. Now, we've had U-turns on both of those. The energy subsidies will still be in place because, frankly, they are needed, but they will only continue until April, and then there will be a review. Most of the tax arrangements, as we know, have been overturned. So the things that really upset international investors to begin with have kind of been dealt with through those U-turns, and there's unlikely to be a U-turn on the U-turns. We won't see a Prime Minister coming in and promising sweeping tax cuts. That just simply isn't going to happen. The question is, what happens now in the fiscal statement on the 31st of October. And the new Prime Minister will be coming in just 3 days before that statement is made. And we also know from what people within Westminster have been telling us over the past week that there are still disagreements within the Conservative Party over just what should happen in that statement, where the cuts will fall, for example, because there will need to be spending cuts. And it's interesting to note that the CBI, the business lobby, has come out and said stability is key. The next Prime Minister will need to act to restore confidence from day one. They'll need to deliver a credible fiscal plan for the medium term as soon as possible. And it's that word credible that others have been repeating as well. Whoever the new Prime Minister is when they come in, they will have to deliver a set of policies that work for investors, that work for the markets, and also that work politically as well.
Theo, thank you very much indeed. Theo Leggett there, our business correspondent. Let's gauge political reaction now from right around the United Kingdom. In a moment, we're going to be talking to our correspondent, Hal Griffith, who's in Cardiff, and Chris Page in Belfast. Let's first of all, though, go to James Shaw, who's in Glasgow. And James, we've had a pretty ferocious reaction to Liz Truss's resignation statement from the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon.
That's right. She said there are no words, Ben, to describe this utter shambles adequately. It is beyond hyperbole and parody. Reality, though, is that ordinary people are paying the price. The interests of the Tory party should concern no one right now. A general election is now a democratic imperative. There have also been responses from the other political parties as well. So Douglas Ross, who is the leader of the Tories in Scotland, he says we must now move forward quickly, and the new leader and Prime Minister will have to restore stability for the good of the country. Anas Sarwar, who's the leader of Scottish Labour, we need a general election now. Alex Cole-Hamilton of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, the Conservatives are not fit for government, also calling for a general election. And Patrick Harvey, who's the joint leader of the Scottish Greens. Never in the field of British politics was so much harm done to so many in so few weeks. So misquoting Winston Churchill, or reversioning that famous quote from Winston Churchill about the Battle of Britain to characterise his view of what Liz Truss's administration has done in the last 6 weeks or so. So I think the general consensus outside the Conservative Party in Scotland, it is very clear, Ben, that consensus is for a general election as soon as possible, but it seems highly unlikely that that call is going to be answered anytime soon.
James, thank you very much indeed. I just want to bring viewers some news that the Times newspaper is reporting that Boris Johnson is expected to stand in the Tory leadership contest that we're going to have. This is from Steve Swinford, who's the Times political editor, saying, I'm told that Boris Johnson is expected to stand in the Tory leadership contest. He is taking soundings, but is said to believe it is a matter of national interest. And if that were true, that would be extraordinary, having been forced out of Downing Street just a few months ago after that whole slew of resignations that began with Rishi Sunak leaving office, and then Boris Johnson, after many of his ministers resigned, being forced himself to resign. And of course that then paved the way for that leadership contest that we saw over the summer between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, that Liz Truss won. And now Liz Truss herself is out of Downing Street. She served 44 days so far. She will stay on as Prime Minister for the time being until there is a new Tory party leader, which is expected to be by October the 28th. But Boris Johnson, according to the Times, is expected to stand in the Tory leadership contest. We'll be getting reaction to that from the Tory party and many other people as well, and trying to find out from Boris Johnson himself if that is true. Now, let's go back to the reaction right around the United Kingdom. We were hearing there from James in Glasgow. Let's go to Hal Griffith, who's got reaction from Wales. And we've been hearing from the First Minister, haven't we?
Yeah, and a pretty scathing response from the First Minister, Mark Drakeford. Not a surprise, maybe, when you remember that he's the leader of the Welsh Labour Party, but certainly not someone with any sympathy for Liz Truss. In a statement, he says there's been a complete and utter failure of government, with everyone in the country now to pay the price. The complete lack of leadership is preventing decisions and action being taken. Now, you have to remember that in 44 days as Prime Minister, Liz Truss didn't even speak to Mark Drakeford. Normally, Prime Minister would speak to First Minister, something we saw on and off with Boris Johnson during the pandemic. But we know that there wasn't even a phone call between the two. So Mark Drakeford may now have to prepare himself for speaking to a new Prime Minister. But who will that be? Were it to be, as the news you just broke there, Boris Johnson to stand, I think some Welsh Conservatives may like that, because in the 2019, Boris Johnson helped to win a record equalling number of seats in Wales, 14 Tory seats. The polls at the moment suggest that most of the blue would be wiped off the map in Wales. So Tory members here in Wales and the Senedd members and the MPs may back that Boris bid if it is confirmed. In terms of the other parties, well, Plaid Cymru scathing as well, joining calls for general election, really making the case that the Westminster chaos, as they call it, is probably an argument for Welsh independence. Eventually, the Liberal Democrats in Wales here too, condemning the actions of Liz Truss's dying government. So very little sympathy, it seems, here for Liz Truss after she's announced her resignation.
Hal, thank you very much. And to Chris Page, who's in Belfast for us. Chris, reaction there to the drama that we've seen unfolding in Downing Street today?
Yes, well, there's now a whole new level of uncertainty, as if any were needed here in Northern Ireland. It's been said in recent days that Westminster had ceased to have a functioning government. Well, Northern Ireland has been without a fully functioning devolved government since February. That was when the Democratic Unionist Party, in effect, collapsed the power-sharing Stormont executive over its opposition to the Brexit trade border with the rest of the UK, known as the Northern Ireland Protocol. And the DUP says it won't allow power-sharing to resume unless checks on goods arriving here from the rest of the UK are scrapped. Sir Graham Brady mentioned Friday, next Friday, the 20th of October, as the day whenever the Tory leadership contest should be concluded. That is also a day marked in the diary in this part of the UK. That is because it is on that day, next Friday, that the legal deadline to restore the devolved government after the election in May runs out. And the current Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, has made clear, really just in the last couple of days, that he will go ahead and call a new election to the Stormont Assembly if there is no political breakthrough. So parties here had been preparing to go back to the polls on the 15th of December. So now lots of questions about that. If it does take until next Friday for the new Prime Minister to be in place, well, you would think that would mean there'd be no time for the Westminster government to change course on calling an election, if indeed they had the legal means to do so. If it was concluded a little bit earlier, well, could you get a new Northern Ireland Secretary with different ideas to Chris Heaton-Harris, who could find some sort of legal mechanism for delaying that Assembly election? So far, we've had the Cross Community Alliance Party and the Nationalist SDLP calling for a general election, never mind an Assembly election. Also, I've just heard from the woman who is in line to be First Minister at Stormont if power sharing is reduced, Sinn Féin's Michelle O'Neill. She said the chaos and disastrous policies of the Tories have heaped misery onto workers, families and businesses. Liz Truss joins the long line of British Prime Ministers who have failed people here, and she says all parties need to work together and support the people in a new Stormont executive. As for the DUP, well, they had been fans of Liz Truss during the Tory leadership contest, thinking she would take a firmer line with Brussels in the negotiations over the Northern Ireland Protocol. But now they will be attacked by other parties for having supported Liz Truss, in essence, up to this point.
OK, Chris, thank you very much. Chris Page for us there in Belfast. Also, thanks to Hal Griffith in Cardiff and James Shaw with reaction from Glasgow as well. And we can go to Glasgow as well to join the Professor Sir John Curtis of the University of Strathclyde, our well-known expert in British political history and all things political. And I want your starter for 10, John Curtis. Does this make Liz Shaw the shortest serving Prime Minister in British political history?
Not quite. George Canning has that prize because he died while he was in office. But yeah, for somebody who's still alive, at least this is the shortest running term.
It's a good pub quiz question, and at least I now know the answer. Thank you very much. Right, what do you make, first of all, about what happens next in terms of this Tory leadership contest? Is it likely to go, do you think, to the wider membership? Can it be done within a few days, within a week?
Well, I think that's probably a technological question which is beyond my ken, as it were, in the sense that, if MPs can whittle the number of candidates down to 2 by, let's say, Tuesday, whether the Conservative Party has the ability to run an effective online ballot within a matter of a couple of days. And doubtless that's probably the question that some of the party officials are currently trying to work out. But that's clearly pretty much the only way of doing it. And that obviously raises the question that, while there'll be some Conservative members who don't necessarily have access to the internet, or at least not very familiar with it, it is a relatively older section of the population. So far as the candidates are concerned, well, you've already talked about Boris Johnson trying to stand. I think we should remember at this point that Mr. Johnson still has hanging over him the inquiry by the Committee on Standards as to whether or not he misled the House of Commons with regard to some of his statements about Partygate. And I would have thought, but maybe I'll be wrong, that Tory MPs might be very wary of jumping back into having Mr. Johnson in office and then finding themselves embroiled in exactly the same arguments about his probity from which they thought they had escaped when he was brought down at the beginning of July. So if we do in the end reckon that Mr. Johnson perhaps isn't going to be a credible runner, then I think it's going to be between Mr. Sunak, Penny Mordaunt and Suella Braverman. I think she made it pretty clear yesterday she would run. My guess is, given how she performed first time around, that Suella Braverman is the one that will fall out. And then the question is, can Rishi Sunak second time around win against Penny Mordaunt? And Penny Mordaunt will be a formidable competition because she is, as others have pointed out, somebody who appeals partly to the centre of the party, who might otherwise be backing Mr. Sunak, and as well as perhaps also being the one that the Trussites, many of whom will be unhappy about what's happened, might be willing to switch to. But of course, doubtless Mr. Sunak will be wanting to remind Tory members and Tory MPs in the course of the next few days that he did warn them that this is exactly what would happen. And he will obviously be hoping that, having been made it clear about that during the last leadership contest, that he might now get rewarded for what he has said, at least second time around.
Whoever it is, John, given the chaos and the meltdown that we have seen in the last few, months and weeks and days, how much damage do you think all of this has done to the Conservative Party electorally? So in other words, whoever it is, could they win the next election whenever it is?
I think the advice has to be to whoever does become the next leader is probably to enjoy the next 18 months to 2 years, because that is probably the length of your tenure. And it is, by the way, probably going to be pretty difficult because you're going to be leading a fractious party, which is not necessarily going to make your life very easy. And I think that's going to be true whoever gets it. The truth is, parties and governments that preside over a fiscal crisis have nearly always struggled at the ballot box at the subsequent election. The Labour Party after 1948, the Labour Party after 1967, Labour after 1976, the Conservatives after Black Wednesday of 1992, and the Labour Party after the financial crisis of 2008. All of these governments did not remain in office for very long thereafter. And I suspect that's probably going to be the fate of this government. But of course, many an individual Tory MP will be hoping that the party at least recovers from being as much as 30 points behind in the polls, which is where they're at the moment. Because if that were to be the result of a general election, the majority of Tory MPs will be out on their ear.
Just a quick question. Keir Starmer and others have been saying there has to be a general election now. And there is a question about the democratic legitimacy of the new Tory leader, the new Prime Minister, as we move further forward away from the last general election?
Well, it is right that this is the first time since the Parliament of 1935 to 1945, which of course was extended because of the Second World War, where we've had more than one change of Prime Minister within the Parliament. And before that, you have to go back to the middle of the 19th century. So certainly this is a novel experience. But in the end, we do have a parliamentary democracy. And so long as somebody can maintain the confidence of the House of Commons, then they will be able to avoid a general election. I think that the big question facing the Conservative Party is, will it be possible for whoever succeeds Liz Truss to be able to maintain the confidence of the House of Commons, or will the divisions inside the Conservative Party be so great that we eventually discover that there isn't anybody in the current Parliament who can maintain the confidence of the House, in which case we might be precipitated into an early general election. That certainly has to be the back of Tory MPs' minds as they try to work out who they're going to back and under what conditions.
Sir John Curtice, thank you as ever for your unique political analysis. It's good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Well, the time is 3 o'clock, and welcome to viewers in the UK and around the world. The British Prime Minister, Liz Truss, has resigned. In a very short statement in Downing Street, she admitted she could no longer deliver the mandate that she was elected on only last month. Her decision followed a meeting with the senior Conservative Party backbench MP Sir Graham Brady amid an atmosphere of exasperation amongst fellow Conservative MPs. Now, the Conservatives will hold a leadership election to replace Liz Truss within the next week, producing what will be the third British Prime Minister since the summer. The Labour Party has called for an immediate general election. Liz Truss's 44 days in office so far have been marked by some of the most dramatic scenes in post-war British politics, and she does become the UK's shortest serving Prime Minister, although, as John Curtice was just telling us, George Canning did die in office. She blamed turbulent economic conditions for the trouble her government has faced.
I came into office and our country has been held back for too long by low economic growth. I was elected by the Conservative Party with a mandate to change this. We delivered on energy bills and on cutting national insurance. And we set out a vision for a low-tax, high-growth economy that would take advantage of the freedoms of Brexit. I recognise, though, given the situation, I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party. I have therefore spoken to His Majesty the King to notify him that I am resigning as leader of the Conservative Party. This morning I met the chairman of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady. We've agreed that there will be a leadership election to be completed within the next week. This will ensure that we remain on a path to deliver our fiscal plans and maintain our country's economic stability and national security. I will remain as Prime Minister until a successor has been chosen. Thank you.
Liz Truss with that very dramatic resignation statement just outside number 10 Downing Street. I just want to correct myself, actually, in terms of who has been the shortest serving British Prime Minister. It is Liz Truss, we are now told, because although we were hearing from Sir John Curtice that it was George Canning who died in April in 1827, he had served 118 days as Prime Minister. Liz Truss, 44 days so far, and by the time she is replaced by the new Tory leader, once he or she is elected, it will be probably something like 50 days. Anyway, let us hear now from Sir Graham Brady, who's chair of the 1922 committee. He says he expects a leadership result by Friday of next week. He's been taking...
Do you accept that this is a complete dog's dinner?
It's certainly not a circumstance I would wish to see.
So, Graham, will you have to make the threshold for nominations really high in order to flush out candidates? You just can't waste time on this now, can you?
I think these are details that will be clear later on. I haven't got any more detail to share with you now, but there will be some clarity later
And
this
how
afternoon.
disappointed are you? Just one more question. How disappointed are you in this? This is the third Prime Minister in 4 months. The public must be looking at this thinking, what on earth is going on? This is the governing party.
Absolutely, and I think we're deeply conscious of the imperative in the national interest of resolving this clearly and quickly.
So they're not just be a general election, Sir Graham. They're not just be a general election. How can you continue to keep
clearly,
in the next
clearly
five
isn't a matter for me.
Will there definitely be two candidates going forward to the membership?
The party's rules say there will be two candidates unless there is only one candidate.
So if somebody drops out, it could only be one.
If there is only one candidate, there is only one candidate.
Do you expect that to happen?
I really can't give you any more detail.
Whose idea, again, was it to have this contest truncated to 1 week? Was it Liz Truss's idea, or was it your proposal?
I think it's a matter on which there is a pretty broad consensus.
And is that because of Victoria Fast?
So that was Sir Graham Brady, and he was saying that there will be a new Tory leader he expects by October the 28th. That's just before the Chancellor, and we don't know whether that will still be Jeremy Hunt, delivers the government's fiscal statement on October the 31st. So Sir Graham Brady expects there to be a new Conservative leader and a new Prime Minister by October the 28th. But as we were just hearing there, he isn't sure whether it will be two candidates, whether it might just end up as one candidate. If it is two candidates, it looks likely to go back to the wider Tory party membership, and how quickly that can be organised technically in terms of some sort of online voting, we will have to wait and see. In the meantime, we've also been getting reaction from the Labour Party leader Sir Keir Starmer, who's demanded an immediate general election, and he's been giving his reaction to the news from Downing Street that Liz Truss is resigning as Tory party leader.
Well, what a mess. And this is not just a soap opera at the top of the Tory party. It's doing huge damage to our economy and to the reputation of our country. And the public are paying with higher prices, with higher mortgages. So we can't have a revolving door of chaos. We can't have another experiment at the top of the Tory party. There is an alternative, and that's a stable Labour government. And the public are entitled to have their say, and that's why there should be a general election.
Some sympathy for Liz Truss, her time in office, pretty humiliating.
The damage that has been inflicted on the public through higher prices and mortgages is considerable. This is not a soap opera. These are real lives that are being impacted by the mess at the top of the Tory party. We've had this revolving door. We've had these experiments at the top of the Tory party. The public are entitled to choose between this utter chaos and a Labour Party which will stabilise the economy and have got a clear plan for growth, for living standards and for jobs of the future. We need a general election so the public can make their mind up about this utter chaos.
Isn't there an argument that a general election might actually prolong the instability to an outcome of that general election? Do we need more instability now, or just a chance for a clean state and just to stabilise the ship?
The risk at the moment is continuing with this chaos, not having a stable Labour government. So that's why there should be a general election. We can't just allow the Tory party to keep putting up the next candidate in the middle of this chaos. There is a choice. There's a Labour Party that's capable of stabilising the economy, has a clear plan, and the public are entitled to choose between that stable Labour government and this utter chaos of the Conservatives.
Are you ready for government? This is not the context you would have wanted to take over.
We are ready to form a government to stabilise the economy and implement a real plan for growth, for living standards, to help people through a cost of living crisis. And that's the choice now, a stable Labour government or this utter chaos from the Conservatives.
Brilliant, thanks.
So that was the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer. Let's go back to our chief political correspondent Nick Eardley, who's in Downing Street. He was there as the Prime Minister came out with what will go down in history as one of the most extraordinary resignation statements of a British Prime Minister. And of course, all eyes now on who might succeed her. And Nick, intriguing reports that Boris Johnson could be throwing his hat into the ring. We're hearing that from the Times, not confirmed at all at the moment.
Yeah, not confirmed by us just yet, Ben. We have asked some of Boris Johnson's allies. I'm told that he is being encouraged by a number of MPs to do so. One of his key allies, Sir James Duddridge, who was his PPS, one of his key aides in Downing Street, basically the person who helped Boris Johnson negotiate with Parliament, he has said that Boris Johnson should come back for the good of the country. Will it happen? Quite possibly. The Times' Steve Swinford is very well connected. I think there is one potential stumbling block there, though, which is MPs. I'm not all that sure that a lot of MPs would want to be seen to be going back to an old leader, even if Boris Johnson did decide to come back from his holiday in the Caribbean and stand for leader. I think it would be tricky for him to persuade enough MPs that he was the right man. I've spoken to some of the people who were his allies in Downing Street just before he stood down as well, and some of them have said they're not all that sure that politically he can recover from some of the scandals over the last few months. But said it an hour ago, I'll say it again, nothing surprises me around here anymore, Ben, so who knows. Rishi Sunak, his allies, are gearing up for him to stand. We've not heard from the former Chancellor yet either, but I'd suggest there's a fairly decent chance of him standing, given that he came second to Liz Truss, came quite close to Liz Truss actually in that leadership contest. And then we have all these other names doing the rounds already. Let me name you a few of them. Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, who stood last time, Penny Mordaunt, who stood last time. The one person who's not going to stand is Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor. Got a lot on his plate. He has to come up with a fiscal plan for the 31st of October, a proper budget to try and plug the fiscal black hole. But look, stand back from it a bit, Ben. What a crisis. This is a genuine political crisis of unprecedented scale, where the country is facing a massive economic challenge. The Prime Minister's been in for 5 weeks and decided she's not up to the job and she can't deliver what she promised. We're going to get a new Prime Minister within a week. They're going to have 3 or 4 days to negotiate with the Chancellor ahead of that budget, and then they're going to try and have to get the economy back on track and then restore some political stability to the highest office in the land. It's an extraordinary, extraordinary moment.
Yeah, it certainly is, Nick. And I was just talking to Sir John Curtis, really, about how much damage all of this has done to the Conservative Party electorally, whenever there is an election. And of course, Keir Starmer wants one right now. It doesn't seem very likely he's going to get it. But whoever is the new leader of the Tory party, they've got a huge challenge economically, but also politically, to try to win back the trust of the British people.
Totally, Ben, and the calls for a general election are going to get louder and louder and louder. Excuse me looking at my phone, but this is moving very quickly. So a couple of things. Just had a text from a friend of Boris Johnson saying they doubt that he'll stand, but they reckon he'll love the speculation. Let's see. Our political editor, Chris Mason, is saying that sources close to Brandon Lewis say that MPs are urging him to stand now. He is, of course, the what is he now? The Justice Secretary. He was the Northern Ireland Secretary. He's now the Justice Secretary, has been for 5 weeks since Liz Truss took over. So what's really intriguing is at the moment, we hinted at this earlier, at the moment it feels like a bit of a free-for-all with loads of MPs saying, well, yes, maybe this person, maybe that person. A lot of people seem to be taking soundings to figuring out if they want to stand. At the moment, it looks like it could be a large field. However, watch what happens this evening. If we get any more details on the rules from Sir Graham Brady, my sense is that MPs will want to get this done as quickly as possible. I reckon they'll want to make the decision themselves, although we'll wait and see if they make that call. And that could mean this moves quite quickly, and the thresholds to get through various rounds are actually quite high to make sure that there is a new Prime Minister in place in this address by this time next week.
Yeah, Nick, of course, look at your phone at any time you want. I won't take it as an insult at all. I know you've got the news to keep up with as you get messages from important political sources. But just on the terms of the rules then, that is going to be crucial, isn't it, that threshold? Because, I mean, not to be rude to potential contenders, but they will want to weed out fringe candidates who aren't going to attract very much support in order to keep this contest as short as possible, just a few days.
I think that's absolutely right. I think there is absolutely no doubt that that's the case. MPs in the Conservative Party that I've been chatting to over the last few days are mortified, some of them, by what's going on at the moment. They feel humiliated by the turmoil in their party, and to be honest, some of them have given up. They don't think that there's going to be a recovery, but those who are still fighting are determined to get this done as soon as possible. The calculation that was being made this morning before Graham Brady turned up here and had that conversation that led to Liz Truss's resignation, the conversations I was having with Conservative MPs were weighing up the question of whether it would avoid chaos to get Liz Truss out or create more chaos. And the hope I think all Conservative MPs will have now is that if they move swiftly, get someone else into place, have a new Prime Minister within the next few days, and don't allow this to become a free-for-all with loads of candidates, they might be able to get someone in who can work on their credibility and that stability and that authority right away. I still think it's going to be extremely challenging. The turmoil in here is going to be really hard to recover from. It's going to be very hard for the new Prime Minister, whoever they may be, to wipe the slate clean in a week's time, not least because they're going to be dealing with the economic decisions that have been made in here over the past 5 weeks of the Liz Truss premiership. However, this is something that is being actively discussed among Conservative MPs this afternoon. Remember, we keep talking about them because they are going to make the big decisions over the next few days. They may well decide over the next few weeks who lives in here.
Nick, I'm going to leave you for a moment. You can check your phone all you like and you go and find out whatever you can and come back to us very soon with more important information. That's Nick Eardley there, our chief political correspondent. And let's also go back now to Anita McVeigh, my colleague, who's in Westminster as well. Anita.
Ben, thank you very much. And with me here is the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey. And we spoke, thank you very much for joining me, first of all. We spoke a couple of days ago when there was speculation that Liz Truss certainly could survive as PM, potentially until the end of October, when the Chancellor would deliver more detail on the government's fiscal plans. But she's gone. Your reaction to that news and the fact that we're going to have a new Conservative Party leader, a new Prime Minister, by next Friday?
Well, Liz Truss trashed the British economy with her unfunded tax cuts. Before her, Boris Johnson failed our country with his dishonesty and law-breaking. The Tories have shown that they're incapable of providing the leadership. They're not fit to govern our country. We don't need another Conservative Prime Minister. They need to go. We need another general election. And Conservative MPs have got to do their patriotic duty and vote for that.
Yet there is no mechanism, is there, to lead to a general election at this point. So what's the strategy for the Lib Dems?
Well, we call on Conservative MPs to do their patriotic duty. If they fail to do that, I think their constituents will note. I think there is a big movement in the country for a general election, and Liberal Democrats want to put forward our positive agenda. You know, we called over a year ago for a windfall tax on the oil and gas companies so we could fund responsibly the help for people with their energy bills. And if they'd follow that policy, we wouldn't be in the mess now. Mortgage rates wouldn't be as high as they are now. So Liberal Democrats want the chance to put our positive policies to the British people, and we want these Conservatives out of government.
What's your reaction to that speculation in the Times that Boris Johnson is taking soundings about whether he should throw his hat in the ring?
Well, we don't want any Conservative Prime Minister. We want election. And Boris Johnson, I can't believe he's even going to put himself forward. There's still an inquiry into whether he misled Parliament. And the whole British people knows that he was dishonest, didn't follow his own rules, broke the law. It could be quite outrageous if Conservative MPs allowed him back.
On who else might stand, we're hearing from The Telegraph. It's reporting that Rishi Sunak is certain to stand for the leadership, according to close allies, senior MP allies of the former Chancellor. You know, there's a bit of a sliding doors rationale for him, isn't there? He can come along and say, well, look, I told you this is what would happen if Liz Truss was elected and she tried to implement these economic policies. We're personally at the BBC trying to confirm this with Rishi Sunak, but the Telegraph's reporting he is certain to stand. So he's going to say to MPs, look, you should have listened to me, we wouldn't be in this position. So how strong is his chance of becoming the next leader, do you think?
Well, his record is poor, as is all the Conservatives. We need them out. They're the ones who caused this mess. Rishi Sunak's policies were disastrous. They failed to give people the help for their energy bills. They didn't tackle inflation, and they didn't produce growth. So wherever you look amongst the Conservative Party, they don't have the people to help people who are struggling with their mortgage bills,
But
with
he
the
wasn't
energy
going for
prices.
he wasn't going for the tax-cutting policies that Liz Truss was he?
Well, he wasn't helping people with their energy bills, and frankly, there's such a divided party. Many people really dislike Rishi Sunak because of what he did to Boris Johnson. They're fighting each other. Our country needs stability. We need a political party and a government that can give strong leadership. The political instability, the divided party, which is the Conservative Party, isn't fit to govern our country. They have to go. And just moving the deck chairs on the Titanic with one failed Conservative MP after another isn't what our country needs. We're in a real mess. It's a huge challenge. Millions of people are struggling families, struggling pensioners. They need help. And with this political instability and divided Conservative Party, they're not going to get it from this lot.
You're a political leader. When you look at the polls in which the Conservatives have been performing so badly, you must be chomping at the bit to get to a general election. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. Keir Starmer also calling for a general election, clearly, and the SNP and other political parties. What do you do in the meantime to try to, keep the faith with those who've already voted for you, to reach out to potential new voters, and to try to take this situation and say, look, vote differently next time?
Well, beyond arguing the case for a general election so we can get rid of the Conservatives, Liberal Democrats will continue to put forward our constructive policies. A year ago, we put forward the windfall tax to raise the money in a responsible way to help people. I led on that debate, others then followed. Liberal Democrats led on the idea of giving support for people on their energy bills. We were the first party to argue to freeze the cap on energy prices, and other people followed the Liberal Democrat lead. We will continue to come up with the policies that our country needs, whether it's on the economy, to deal with the cost of living crisis, or on the NHS and social care, where there's a crisis with our public services on their knees. So we're determined to listen to our constituents. At a community level, we've got great representation, and to build on the successes we've had over the last 12 months, where we beat the Conservatives in 3 by-elections in their heartlands, and in the local elections last May across the whole UK, Liberal Democrats did better than any other political party. So we're ready. We're beginning to, I think, attract support to us because we have those sensible policies.
Sir Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats, thank you very much for your time. Yes, so just to recap on that news, that the Telegraph is reporting that Rishi Sunak is certain to stand, is the quote, according to the Telegraph, who've been speaking to senior MP allies of the former Chancellor. We believe he's in his constituency in North Yorkshire. He has been keeping a pretty low profile in recent days and weeks, hasn't he? But, during that election campaign, when it got down to him and Liz Truss as the final 2 candidates to be the next party leader and Prime Minister, he said that if Liz Truss was elected and implemented her economic policies, well, he pretty much predicted what has happened in terms of market reaction to her tax-cutting plans. So Rishi Sunak certain to stand, according to the Telegraph. We are here at the BBC trying to confirm that. But with me now, right now, with her reaction is Carla Denyer, the co-leader of the Green Party. Carla, thank you very much for joining us here on BBC News today. And like I've been asking all the other politicians I've been speaking to, first of all, your reaction to the events of the last couple of hours.
Well, the events of the last couple of hours, weeks, months, you could say years, has demonstrated that the Conservative Party are unfit to govern. The chaos they've created through their ideological movements by Truss in her mini-budget, the untold harm that's caused to the economy, and let's not forget the harm that it's caused to people in their everyday lives. People were already struggling from the cost of living crisis, and now there's more and more uncertainty. People are really living in fear about what it means for them. We cannot allow the Conservative government to, yet again, a very small pool of people choosing who runs this country from an increasingly small pool of people with the talents to do so.
So you're basically saying the Conservatives had their chance to try to create a fresh start when they chose Liz Truss. That hasn't worked out yet. there isn't a mechanism, is there, for a general election to be called? It's within the gift of the Conservative Party. It doesn't look like the Conservative Party, their MPs are going to vote for that to happen or say that should happen when the party is doing so badly in the polls.
Yeah, I recognise, of course, that we're in a parliamentary democracy, and so it is not constitutionally required to change, to have a general election when they have a change of the leader of government. However, it is very clear that the Conservative Party have lost the trust of the vast majority of the public. They've really lost the authority to govern nationally and internationally. And now with Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor, he's clearly laying the groundwork for bringing in a second round of austerity, which will be massively harmful. You know, I'm a local councillor in Bristol. I've been a councillor since 2015. And so I've seen firsthand the horrendous impacts of the first round of austerity on government spending, including local government spending, and it really hampering the ability of local government to provide essential services to people that are struggling, even services like preventing homelessness. And yet, with no electoral mandate whatsoever, Jeremy Hunt is trying to bring in another round of damaging austerity. He's simply not got the votes to back up those policies.
Yeah, he has said that public spending will rise overall, but of course there's been no commitment, has there, to that rising in line with inflation, which would be a cut in real terms, just to explain to our viewers. But same question I put to Ed Davey a couple of minutes ago. As a political party, you know, were the conditions such that there was a general election as a possibility, you would be chomping at the bit to get out there and campaign. So, but with that looking unlikely, it seems, what's your strategy now?
Well, yes, we are ready for a general election, and we had our party conference just a couple of weeks ago, a few days before the Conservatives, and the contrast couldn't be more stark. The mood in the Green Party conference, a journalist reporting from there described it as calm. It was really focused, and we're all really pulling in the same direction. We've got a fantastic set of policies, including some more that were adopted at that conference, and we're really raring to go to get more Greens elected in Parliament, because whichever party is in government, if we can get a few more Green MPs in Parliament, we can pull that government in the right direction, keep them on the straight and narrow, and make sure they're passing policies that bring us towards a fairer and greener country.
Carla, thank you very much. Carla Denyer, co-leader of the Green Party. Well, it's going to end up as a question in quizzes, isn't it? Which Prime Minister had the shortest time in office? That is Liz Truss, the rather ignominious, certainly not an honour, ignominious title that she would have now. 44 days in office. She's going to be there for one more week until a new leader is appointed by next Friday, the 28th. Quite a dizzying speed of events. Someone who can put all of this in a much greater context is Anthony Selden, the historian, who joins me now. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. And I hope you're not going to correct me. I am right in saying that she is the shortest serving Prime Minister.
She is indeed. So Canning was 119 days, but he died, so he couldn't have done very much about that. And you say trying to put it in some kind of context. I'm not certain I can. I mean, it's all the records are just collapsing before our eyes. This is extraordinary.
Yeah, that's been reflected by other people I've spoken to today, that there really isn't any sort of precedent for this sort of thing. So what does this say to the UK, to the rest of the world, about the functioning of Parliament here, the mother of parliaments just across the road from where we are standing? What does it say about how it functions and how the parties within the system here function?
Well, people all around the world look to Parliament. So many copied Parliament in one form or other, and so many copied the office of Prime Minister, which is the longest surviving office anywhere, leader's office anywhere in the modern world. 301 years. We're now on to our 57th Prime Minister, 57 varieties indeed of Prime Minister, and I think it's showing them that the country that should be the most grown up and mature, that has given its system of government across the world, is making a total hash of it at the moment.
57 prime ministers, but the turnover rate in just the last few years has been remarkably fast, hasn't it? All Conservative prime ministers in the last 5-6 years.
Yeah, we've never seen this before. I mean, in the Premiership League of Football, you expect a rapid churn in the Premiership League, but you don't in the League of Premiers expect such rapid churn, and we have never seen that before in prime ministers since the 1832 Reform Act, which created our modern democracy. And when you combine that with the churn of Chancellors of the Exchequer, their second Lord of the Treasury, and also Home Secretaries, this is a fundamental weakness. Now, none of this means that the country can't recover. And in Jeremy Hunt, there is one grown-up, sensible figure who's earned trust across the spectrum and markets. If he can, and the like of him can be there, then it can stabilise the country economically and financially. Politically, it does look like a very bleak future for the Tories if they can hold the general election off indeed for 2 years, and if it's not going to be coming even sooner.
Yeah, I mean, he has just, if he is still Chancellor when the new leader is appointed, he has just a few days then with that new leader potentially before he delivers his fiscal statement, his budget on the 31st of October. Yeah. So it's a very short period. You want to come in there?
I mean, just let's get this clear. You have to have stability in a democracy. You have to know who people are, who's the Prime Minister, who's the Chancellor, who's the Home Secretary overseeing the security
these big offices
of the whole country, because the markets, foreign powers look to this country and they form a jaundiced view. We've just lost the most recognised, loved, known figure in the world in Her Majesty the Queen. That's another element of instability. And we have the possibility of strikes and NHS queues and fuel bills and great uncertainty coming up. It needs people to stop playing at politics and recognise what a very serious business this is. These records, history does matter. It matters that you have stability, and you're never going to get a sizable round of cuts through, public expenditure cuts through, unless a Prime Minister commands confidence around that cabinet table. So very rapidly, there needs to be a new Prime Minister who is a grown-up, who does inspire confidence, and who recognises that you can't just suddenly rush in. Margaret Thatcher, she was very careful. She had her own majority when she came in 1979, but she still took 2 years before acting against the trade unions, learning that her predecessor, Ted Heath, had made a muddle by rushing in. It requires a serious outbreak of wisdom. That's what we need.
And it requires, it sounds as though you're saying, the Conservative Party, all of its members, to take a step back and get over their differences in the interests of stability. That's going to be a pretty tall order, isn't it? Because there has been a lot of fractiousness in the discussion, in the debate within the Conservatives, hasn't there?
Are they capable of it, one wonders? I mean, there are some who get it, but they're there to serve, not to serve their own narrow tribal interests, but to serve the country at what is becoming, if it's not already, a significant crisis, moving towards the major crises we've had in the past of Suez in 1956, the IMF crisis in 1976, Black Wednesday in 1992. There are elements of all those in this, and this could get even worse unless somebody, for goodness sake, gets a grip soon.
Anthony, really good to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time today. The historian Anthony Selden there. We'll have more reaction for you here on College Green very soon, but right now it's back to the studio.
Anita, let's just bring you a little bit more on the possibility that Boris Johnson could stand in the leadership contest. The Times are certainly reporting that they are quoting sources close to Boris Johnson as saying that he believes it's a matter of the national interest, that soundings are being taken. Would be an extraordinary development, just a matter of weeks actually after he finally left Downing Street, that he could conceivably return there. But we've got some word from our political editor, Chris Mason, on that speculation. And Chris Mason says that those around Boris Johnson are not knocking these stories down. A source telling our political editor he is not saying anything either way at the moment. So it's being reported by the Times, but it hasn't been clarified or confirmed at all that Boris Johnson is going to run in this leadership race. So we will have to watch this space. We've also had a statement from the US President Joe Biden about the resignation announced today of Liz Truss. And I'll just tell you what Joe Biden has been saying, that the US and the UK are strong allies and enduring friends. That fact will never change. I thank Prime Minister Liz Truss for her partnership on a range of issues, including holding Russia accountable for its war against Ukraine. We will continue our close cooperation, says Joe Biden, with the UK government as we work together to meet the global challenges that our nations face. So that is a statement just in from Joe Biden reacting to the news that Liz Truss is stepping down as Tory party leader and will be gone as UK Prime Minister in just a few days' time once a successor is elected by the Conservative Party. Who's that going to be? The runners and riders will no doubt emerge very soon. But let's go to our correspondent Duncan Kennedy, who's in Winchester, getting some reaction from voters who must be, Duncan, pretty surprised at today's turn of events. Or maybe not surprised.
Some are, some aren't. Over the short time we've been here, Ben, we've got various reactions on that. We'll find out a couple in a second, a couple of people we've got here to speak to. Let me just tell you about the constituency that we're in. It is Winchester, and it's one of the more marginal seats in the country, currently held by the Conservatives in the form of Steve Brine, who's got a majority of 985, so very marginal here. It tends to flip-flop in the last few years between the Conservatives and the Liberal Dems, but at the moment it's held marginally by Steve Brine. It's also a very busy town, busy city this afternoon because there's a graduation ceremony going on at the local university. And two people who've stopped by to talk to us are Tim and Liv Buscher, who are here for the day. As Ben had just asked me there, let me ask you, what's your reaction to Liz Truss going, first of all?
It's very good news. That woman was trying to destroy the country with these mad policies, and at last the Tories have seen sense and pushed her out.
You voted various parties down the years. Liz, what's your reaction to Liz Truss going?
I'm just, hooray. I think it's, well past time. I thought she was absolutely appalling.
Were you surprised she went?
No, not really, because it's been sort of coming for a few days now, I think. She's just kept hanging on there, and we thought she'd never go.
We've been chatting here for the last few minutes. You've got a few ideas as to what should come next.
A general election, please.
Simple as that.
Yes.
Tim?
Absolutely a general election. That's the only thing. You can't keep putting in another Prime Minister, the Tories, electing among themselves.
Let's just assume they are for the moment, for the purposes of the next week or so. Whose names, whose candidates are popping up in your mind?
Anyone except for Boris Johnson. So I guess Rishi Sunak has at least got a brain on him, which is more than you could be said for Liz Truss.
We've got the Times newspaper reporting in the past few minutes that Boris is standing, but no confirmation from anybody. Would Boris be one for you, Liz?
No, it would be a disaster. I mean, he's under investigation still. I don't see how he could possibly even stand.
If not Boris, give us a name each.
Rishi Sunak, maybe. Gove? I don't know.
I think Gove might be a bit of a dark horse in here. He's been very quiet and he's quite an operator. But actually a general election is what's needed for the country.
Tim and Liz Buscher, thank you very much indeed. Just a couple of voices from a very big city with a lot of people in it. The kinds of voices I suspect, Ben, that the candidates who do stand in the next week or so will be hearing a lot more of.
Duncan, thank you very much indeed. Immediate reaction there from Winchester. Good to see you. Now, we've been hearing from the Conservative MP Mark Garnier, who says there should be a general election in reasonably short order and that the public would be rightly furious if it were unnecessarily delayed. He's been speaking to BBC Radio Hereford and Worcester, and he started off by saying how damaging he thought Liz Truss's time in office has been for the country and indeed for his party.
It's been simply breathtakingly damaging. It is absolutely astonishing. If you think we were with Boris when he left, we were 5 or 6 points behind in the opinion polls. I think the latest one has us minus 36, which is astonishing. If we had an election tomorrow, there would not be a single Conservative member of Parliament left. And bear in mind, politics is a tough game, but the Conservative Party is the most successful political party there has ever been in the history of politics in the world. It has been astonishingly successful, and she has done an immense amount of damage to it.
And you just said it there, didn't you, really, that if you were to have a general election tomorrow, there wouldn't be a Conservative MP left. Now, as we heard with our political reporter there, James, we didn't get to choose the last one. We're not going to get to choose this one as a voting nation. Morally, why shouldn't there be a general election? Isn't it time?
Yeah. So look, I completely agree. At the end of the day, the Constitution doesn't require it, but your point about it being morally or ethically, kind of what would be the right thing to do. So I was asked about this earlier this week, and I basically sort of said I agree with the principle that we should test the new Prime Minister reasonably short order, rather than wait potentially until January 2025. I think people would be furious, rightly furious. What I would say, though, I'll caveat that comment with a really important point, which is that it would be a very unhealthy general election if you were to have one of the major protagonists, and particularly the government, the party that's in government at the time, being in complete disarray, because democracy requires there to be viable choices. If we, for example, had a general election today with no leader, it wouldn't really be a viable choice. So I think what we would probably ask is a bit of time to get ourselves into general election order, and then go to the country, because I completely agree with you. I think people will be rightly furious if we delay this unnecessarily before having a general election.
That's the view of one Conservative MP. Just a bit of reaction to that report in the Times newspaper this afternoon that Boris Johnson is considering standing, being one of the contenders for the Tory leadership race to replace Liz Truss, which would be an extraordinary development if considering the fact he only left Downing Street a matter of weeks ago. And the Deputy Liberal Democrat leader, Daisy Cooper, has said he should be barred from competing in the Tory leadership contest. And quoting Daisy Cooper, she said, "The fact that Conservative MPs are even considering putting Boris Johnson back in number 10 shows how out of touch they really are. Boris Johnson was forced to resign in disgrace. He shattered public trust in the government. He must never be allowed near Downing Street again." That is the view of the Liberal Democrats. We haven't yet had it confirmed that Boris Johnson is in contention for the leadership again. We are hearing that he is taking soundings. Let's get more now from Anita McVeigh at Westminster.
Yes, Ben, thank you. We are just hearing that news as well about Mark Garnier, the Conservative MP, saying that he wants to see an election soon. With me, Jonathan Ashworth, Labour's Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, and looking pleasantly surprised at that statement from Mark Garnier, Jonathan.
Yes, I agree with Mark Garnier. It's pretty clear to me that the Conservatives have no mandate to stay in government. The crisis of soaring mortgage rates, the run on pension funds, is an economic crisis which was designed and manufactured in Downing Street, and Tory MPs cannot stitch it up and enforce on the country another Tory Prime Minister and cut the public out. We need a general election now.
But are you surprised to hear a Conservative MP say that? And I wonder, do you think he might be an outlier? Because with the polls the way they are, surely the majority of Conservative MPs wouldn't want an election.
Oh, I think Mark Garnier I didn't hear the interview, but I suspect he probably agrees that it's utterly abhorrent that we could have another Tory Prime Minister forced upon us and the public are denied any say in that whatsoever. We need a general election because this government, this Conservative government after 12 years, have got no mandate. They've given us economic crisis and people have had enough. People have really had enough. And we need a government that will stabilise the economy, clear up this economic mess and rebuild our public services. So I think when Mark can probably sense, like I do, that people have had enough, and that's why we need a general election.
How are you going to clear up what you call the economic mess with many of the global conditions that the current government is facing, still in place, continuing to be in place for some time, the war in Ukraine, chief amongst those?
Well, there is a global backdrop, that is true, which is why it was so disastrous of the Conservatives to pour petrol on that fire, if you like, with that kamikaze budget, which led to a run on pension funds, a spike in borrowing costs and soaring mortgage rates. Look, we would always be prudent and we would never be reckless with the public finances. So we would bring stability and certainty back to the economy. But we'd also begin to rebuild our public services, and we'll take measures to help stabilise the cost of living crisis as well.
Jonathan Ashworth, I'm just going to interrupt our interview right now, because as we look at these pictures of Downing Street, so much has happened there in the last couple of hours. We're going to say goodbye just now, and thanks for watching to our viewers on BBC One. And still with me here at Westminster, Labour's Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary Jonathan Ashworth. We're just seeing a line being reported by the Westminster editor of The Sun, who is saying he has been told Boris Johnson is making plans to cut short his holiday. He hopes to be on a flight back to the UK this evening from the Dominican Republic. Speculation that he might throw his hat in the ring to become Prime Minister again. I mean, what's your reaction to that?
I mean, it just absolutely beggars belief, doesn't it? I mean, Boris Johnson was the man who was partying away in Downing Street, breaking all the rules, who has contributed to this crisis that we are in. And Tory MPs are now turning to Boris Johnson. I mean, I don't actually believe it. I think it just reinforces the point I was making earlier. The idea that this can all be stitched up in the corridors of that building and the public are denied any say whatsoever is abhorrent. We need a general election.
But without the mechanism to achieve that, as I've been discussing in the last few minutes with other party leaders, Ed Davey, a co-leader of the Green Party as well, you know, without the mechanism to achieve that, what are you going to do? What's your strategy?
Well, I mean, we have to continue to make the argument, but I just tell you, I think I sense a yearning for change in the country. When they talk to people about the rising food shopping bills, the gas and electric bills, the soaring mortgage rates as a consequence of the decisions taken by this Conservative government after 12 years in power, people have had enough. I think people want a change of direction. And the idea that they can just all cook it up in here, stitch it all up in here, and deny the British public a say in any of that, well, I think Tory MPs will get quite a rude awakening. It's why we're going to repeat our message, and it's not just the message of politicians, it's the message of the British people that we need a general election.
It still doesn't get you what you're expressing. It still doesn't get you to that mechanism to have the general election.
There are parliamentary rules in here. I mean, so in some respect, we're operating within the rules of Parliament. So in the end, it's up to Conservative MPs to decide. There you go, someone bloke calling for a general election. But it's up to Conservative MPs as to whether they want to stitch this up for the Tory party or whether they want to put the national interest first and call a general election.
But maybe a wait until 2024.
Well, that's Conservative MPs if they do that, though. But, you know, I think there's a yearning for change because people have had enough.
Jonathan Ashworth, Shadow Work and Pensions Minister, thank you very much indeed. So there you heard it. We've heard it from other parties here this afternoon, the Lib Dems, the Green Party, all of them really chomping at the bit to get to a general election. But at the moment, that is within the gift only, if I can put it that way, of the Conservatives. One more week, a little over a week. Friday next week, we're going to have a new leader of the Conservative Party, a new Prime Minister. Let's see if any other MPs in the meantime, like Edward Garnier, come out and say that they think actually there should be an election. So far, he seems to be a lone voice amongst the Conservatives saying that. Back to you, Ben.
Anita, thank you very much indeed. Let's explore that idea a bit more now, because we can talk to the constitutional expert, Professor Vernon Bogdanor, Research Professor at the Centre for British Politics and Government at King's College, London. I mean, constitutionally, clearly, there doesn't have to be an election, but is there a question of democratic legitimacy for a new Prime Minister coming in, whoever he or she may be?
Let me first apologise to you and to the viewers, because I'm suffering from a cold, which isn't fortunately COVID, but I think I'm in a better state than the Conservative Party. Now, constitutionally, there's no case for a general election. There wasn't one, for example, when Gordon Brown succeeded Tony Blair in 2007, nor in 1990 when John Major succeeded Margaret Thatcher. However, what we have here is a second change of Prime Minister within the same Parliament, and that has never happened before, except in the unusual circumstances of wartime in 1940, when Winston Churchill replaced Neville Chamberlain, who had in turn replaced Stanley Baldwin. Now, the political case is obviously very strong because the new Prime Minister needs a mandate for the austerity programmes which Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has promised. But that's a political argument and not a constitutional one.
When you watched today's events unfold in Downing Street, what was your reaction? Liz Truss, as we've been observing, has served as Prime Minister for less time than the leadership contest that she fought over the summer. She is the shortest termed Prime Minister in British political history. George Canning, I think, was over 100 days. She's going to be lucky if she makes 50 days.
That's absolutely right. We're seeing unprecedented events. But a lot has been concentrated, not surprisingly, on Liz Truss. It's worth saying, perhaps, the policies she was following were not just hers. They were the policy broadly of the Brexit wing of the Conservative Party, of the cheerleaders of Brexit, like Sir John Redwood and Suella Braverman. So it's not just her responsibility, it's something much wider than that, I think.
And is that still a fight for the soul of the Conservative Party, do you think, in the wake of Brexit?
Well, I think the hard Brexiteers have now been discredited, and the idea of tax cuts based on borrowing has also been discredited. We face now austerity. Now, that's not wholly due to the mistakes that Liz Truss's government made. We'd have those problems anyway because of the energy crisis and the Ukraine war and COVID. In any case, people's standard of living would have to fall, even if Liz Truss had never existed. And I think that's a point that ought to be made, because all of the problems are now being blamed on Liz Truss. And although she's worsened the situation, we'd face a crisis even without that.
We've seen, well, the next Prime Minister is going to be, what, the fifth Prime Minister, I think, in 6 years. I mean, just put that into historical context for us, because, you know, in the old days when I was growing up, Prime Ministers lasted quite a few years, not quite a few days.
Yes, all that is unprecedented. And as you implied a moment ago, it's partly due to Brexit. If you can go back to 1975, when we had another referendum on Europe, and that led to a 2-to-1 majority for staying in the European Union, a very pro-European Roy Jenkins, a senior minister in the then Labour government, said that he was rather worried about Brexit because he said we'd be in an old people's home for fading nations. And he said he didn't think it would be very comfortable because he didn't like the look of some of the wardens. Now, if you look at what's happened since 2016, as it were, the wardens of Brexit have taken over, and people have to make their own judgments about that.
How much damage, whenever there is an election, and we don't know when that will be, obviously, but how much damage do you think all of this has done to the Conservative Party, whoever is the next leader, in terms of both the party's reputation for fiscal responsibility and credibility, and also for political stability?
Well, in politics, as in life, anything can happen. Before the Falklands War in 1982, Margaret Thatcher was the most unpopular Prime Minister since records began. If anyone had then predicted the Conservatives would be in power for another 15 years, they'd have been thought to be rather deranged. Again, when Margaret Thatcher fell in 1990, no one believed that the Conservatives could recover. But under John Major, they did. He said this is a fresh administration. It has very little to do with Margaret Thatcher. And the Conservatives scraped home in 1992. So although it's very likely that the Conservatives are facing electoral defeat, there really are no iron laws in politics.
Bernard Bogdan, always good to get your analysis. Thank you so much on this extraordinary day at Westminster. Thank you for your time. I just want to bring you something that Theresa May, one of the Tory party's recent Prime Ministers, of course, has said. The Prime Minister, Liz Truss, is right to provide a roadmap for an orderly transition. MPs must now be prepared to compromise. It is our duty to provide sensible, competent government at this critical moment for our country. So those are the words of Theresa May. I think it's probably fair to say she is not going to be in the running for the leadership contest, but Boris Johnson certainly might be. We are hearing from reports, the Times newspaper amongst others, are saying that he is taking soundings on whether or not to stand in the leadership race. We can get more reaction now, I think, from our political correspondent Jonathan Blake, who's in the House of Commons. The sort of runners and riders already potentially beginning to emerge. What are you hearing, Jonathan?
They are, Ben, and as you were just saying, Boris Johnson is one name which is being talked about, and not only are those close to him doing nothing to dampen down the speculation that he may well throw his hat into the ring to make a spectacular return, as he might hope. Some of his supporters are already out making the running for him, and we can speak to one of those now. Brendan Clark-Smith, Conservative MP for Bassett Law and Cabinet Office Minister. Boris Johnson left office
party member, so that's why I think he'd be the ideal candidate.
If not Boris Johnson, who should it be?
I don't know, to be honest. I think we'll see who puts their name forwards first, but I think the important thing is whoever becomes the leader. I backed Liz Truss in the summer, but if Rishi Sunak could have won that, he would have had my 100% support, because divided parties don't win elections. So whoever does become the next leader of the party, I think whoever wins, then everybody needs to give them their full backing, because if they don't, we're not going to function as a government and it's not going to work.
And if it is Boris Johnson, would he need a new mandate from the country? Should he call a general election if re-elected as leader?
I don't think he does. I think we've got the 2019 manifesto that's there. There's all the levelling up that we wanted to do. And really, I think he wants to finish the job there. So I think the mandate is very much already there. And I think, really, you know, there's some unfinished business there for Boris. So I think he wants to come in. He's got the drive. He's got the passion. He's always stated that his passion for the job has never really gone away. I know he's on holiday with his family at the moment, and I'm sure he's taking a well-deserved break, but if he's listening here, there's certainly a lot of support, and I'd urge him to put his name forward.
Brendan Clark-Smith, thank you very much for joining us here on BBC News. So there you hear support already here in Parliament from some Conservative MPs for Boris Johnson to make a return. No confirmation from him that he intends to stand, but plenty of speculation that he may do, and that would make for a fascinating few days ahead. Ruled out of the contest so far, triggered by Liz Truss's resignation earlier today, Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, Michael Gove, the former Levelling Up Secretary, as well as holding several other jobs in Cabinet. Big question marks over Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary until yesterday, and Kemi Badenoch, the International Trade Secretary, who has yet to declare. Both of those would be crucial names in the contest. Penny Mordaunt also picking up a lot of support as well.
And Jonathan, just a quick question. I mean, if they want to do this painlessly and quickly, and it sounds like that's what Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 committee, really wants, it would be best for the party, wouldn't it, if one single candidate emerged that they could all agree on? I mean, that doesn't seem, though, very likely at the moment.
It's very unlikely, Ben. I think if there was one single candidate that the party could have got behind, then they would have done so already, and Liz Truss would have left office sooner than she is intending to. There will be a contest. It will be quick, but I think the chances of it being painless are pretty slim because, as we're hearing, there is no groundswell of support.
好，各位观众，我们持续为您掌握上任第45日英国地区领导人卓慧思宣布辞职的最新消息，请记者告诉我们，请说。好的，主播，各位观众，英国特拉斯于当地时间今天下午宣布辞去首相职务，保守党国会议员将于下周内完成继任党魁选举。特拉斯就任仅6周，推出的经济计划就造成火场震荡，并引发保守党分裂。因乡特拉斯宣布辞保守党魁上任仅6周成史上最短命首相特拉斯在唐宁街10号前宣读声明说：“我承认，鉴于当前形势，我无法履行我在当选保守党党魁时所承担的任务。因此，我已与国王陛下交谈，通知他我将辞去保守党领袖的职务。他表示，保守党国会议员将进行党魁选举，并于下周内完成。”特拉斯近日在重大经济政策上法家湾，而后开除财相夸腾，公开敦促他请辞的自家保守党议员早已多达10多位。多名议员先前说，他的任期实际上已然告终，下台只是时间问题。一名阁员先前告诉《泰晤士报》，当前状况已进入末期。随着财政大臣夸腾上周被炒鱿鱼，内政大臣布瑞弗曼昨天辞职，国会议员在表决中离心离德。特拉斯可能判断他的政府已经遭到削弱，该是离开的时候。他表示将续任首相直到确定继任者，那可能意味保守党在不到2个月前的党魁之争落幕之后，又得再开启一场党魁争霸。不过保守党也可以团结一致，选出单一人选接替，以避免冗长而分歧的斗争。前首相梅伊2016年就是在其他所有竞争者退出的情况下取代卡麦隆成为首相。英国地区领导人特拉斯在上任仅45天后，戏剧性地辞去了地区领导人职务，成为英国有史以来执政时间最短的地区领导人。他在上任后推出的袖珍预算案引发金融市场剧烈的反应，英镑汇率大跌后，英国地区执政保守党面临内外的巨大政治压力。尽管特拉斯撤换了财政大臣，新上任的财政大臣改变了他的大部分经济政策，但保守党议员仍然要求他离职，而主要反对党工党也提议立刻举行大选。特拉斯女士在9月由保守党成员选举出任首相一职，但她在一系列政策大转弯后彻底失去了执政权威。特拉斯下台的关键原因有哪些？他很快陷入麻烦。特拉斯进入唐宁街后任命的财政大臣，在他上任后第3周公布了价值450亿英镑的减税计划，即所谓的袖珍预算案。 引起了金融市场的剧烈波动，英镑汇率一度跌至过去37年来的最低点，被广泛指责造成了巨大的经济问题。包括国际货币基金组织 IMF 在内的国际机构罕见地对英国的这一减税计划提出批评。特拉斯受到国内和国际的巨大政治压力和批评，他被迫解除了财政大臣的职务。新任命的财相亨特提出经济路线大转弯，几乎全盘推翻了他的经济方案。党内外一片反对声，上任不足2月的特拉斯在执政保守党内部失去了支持，数十名保守党人呼吁他下台。在他解除财政大臣职务几天后，周三他的内政大臣苏拉·布拉福曼突然辞职，更加剧了党内的乱局。有保守党议员公开表示，对无能的人已经忍无可忍。与此同时，英国政界对首相极为不满，主要反对党工党要求立即举行大选，而媒体对首相大加讥讽与批评。无法兑现政治承诺。在特拉斯的辞职讲话中，他承认，我认识到自己无法兑现胜出保守党选举所做的承诺。特拉斯接手掌管的英国刚刚经历过新冠疫情造成的经济低迷，物价上涨，又面临俄罗斯入侵乌克兰造成的能源危机。在这样的经济形势下，他提出的为经济增长而减税的计划，被认为从根本上无法解决英国面临的问题。以上是关于英国地区领导人卓慧思宣布辞职的最新消息。主播。
好的，谢谢记者。那么关于英国地区领导人卓慧思宣布辞职的最新消息，我们继续来看 BBC 新闻的最新点评。
This will ensure that we remain on a path to deliver our fiscal plans and maintain our country's economic stability and national security. I will remain as Prime Minister until a successor has been chosen. Thank you.
Very short statement. Liz Truss not staying to answer any questions from the journalists who are here, and I can tell you that here in Downing Street the world's media has gathered for an extraordinary event at the end of a quite extraordinary few days. Our political correspondent Alex Forsyth is with me. Do you know, I texted one of our producers this morning who said to me, you know, it's a period of relative calm after the events of last night, and I said, well, we might be in the eye of the storm and the turbulence might yet be coming, and sure enough that's how it proved. There was a sort of inevitability about it in the end.
I think that's right, there was. I think there's been a trajectory that this process has been on with Conservative MPs who were deeply unhappy after that mini-budget. Then that was exacerbated by the scenes we saw in Parliament last night over that fracking vote when MPs were confused about what they were doing. There seemed to be no leadership or authority. And so this morning when I was in Parliament talking to Conservative MPs, they were saying it's a matter of really when, not if, that Liz Truss goes. But I think the speed at which it happened today did take some people by surprise, because we had Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 committee, going into Downing Street. We're told that was at the Prime Minister's request. She wanted to get a measure of the mood of the party. Not long after that, of course, we had that lectern coming out into Downing Street. And Christian, you know, and I know, when the lectern comes out into Downing Street, that is going to be a significant moment. But really, up until Liz Truss uttering those words, people were still speculating about whether she might try to hold on or what she might be trying to say to the country. So I think, in truth, given the magnitude of the events, the size of the U-turns of Liz Truss's government, the fact she had to row back on what she effectively stood for, there was an inevitability that it would come to this point. But this has happened pretty quickly today.
Just to put that into some perspective for people at home, for Sir Graham Brady to come here and give her the mood and the tenor of the party, ordinarily, if they were going to challenge a leader, there would need to be 15% of the Conservative MPs putting in a letter. He had made it quite clear that it would need to be somewhere near half of the party. So we are talking about a catastrophic collapse of confidence in the Prime Minister within the Conservative Parliamentary Party.
Yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up. And of course, remember, we're in a slightly different position because under the rules of the Conservative Party, MPs couldn't challenge Liz Truss for her first year in office. And that is why the normal rules, whereby it would require 15% of MPs to put in a letter of no confidence and then a contest would be triggered, that wasn't the case right now because we're in that sort of holding period in her first 12 months of her premiership. And that is why Graham Brady, I think, really wanted to get a sense that the majority of the party had lost support for Liz Truss. You know, I think for him to have said that to her, that conversation must have been quite frank, and we are speculating, it's important to say. We don't know what exactly was said behind the Downing Street door, but quite clearly the message was conveyed that the confidence of the party isn't there, and that is why Liz Truss took the decision she did. And remember, of course, it was only yesterday she was at the dispatch box in Parliament during Prime Minister's questions saying, I am a fighter, not a quitter. Twitter, and then look how quickly things have unravelled. You know, there was a sense that she did okay-ish given the circumstances at PMQs, and then we had the resignation of the Home Secretary, we had the chaos over that vote in Parliament, and really there was a sense that authority was just ebbing away, and lots of MPs were saying to me, the game's up, we just need to know how and when the next steps are. And that then happened today, you know, 1:30. Liz Truss called time on her own premiership.
How much do you think the events yesterday and the resignation of the then Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, was a factor in this? Because clearly Suella Braverman was from the right of the party. She'd already junked the mini budget which appealed to the right of the party, and then one of their own walks out of Downing Street after, according to the papers, a 90-minute row. How much is that a factor, do you think, in what has gone on today?
And, you know, a real blaster of a resignation letter that Suella Braverman said that she didn't basically agree with the direction of the government and people had to own their mistakes. I think what that did, Christian, was lay bare the challenge that was confronting Liz Truss, and that is that she really had alienated people from across the Conservative Party by this point, because that mini budget, that aggravated a lot of what you'd call the One Nation, the more centre ground Conservatives who thought she'd gone too fast with her programme of tax cuts and deregulation. And then Suella Braverman yesterday on her resignation made clear that actually the right of the party were pretty angry with Liz Truss's about turn. And so Liz Truss was in this position where she couldn't really look to any corner of the Conservative Party for support. You add on to that what happened in Parliament when MPs were furious because they felt they were going through the voting lobbies, felt that they didn't know what they were doing, there was no control, there was no authority. There was a period when the government couldn't even tell us if the Chief Whip was still in her job. And I think that all led MPs to conclude that this was a government without direction or authority that couldn't command the support of the party. And that is why, ultimately, Liz Truss took the decision that she did.
I want to talk about what happens from here. Before we do that, let's just listen to Sir Graham Brady, who now, for, the second time in the last 3 or 4 months, has to put a leadership contest together and get it out of the way very, very quickly to restore some order. So let's have a listen to what Sir Graham Brady said just a short time ago.
Good afternoon, everybody. There's not a great deal that I can say at the moment. I just wanted to confirm I'll be meeting with the officers of the 22 and the executive later this afternoon. We also have a meeting of the Conservative Party board. I have spoken to the party chairman, Jake Berry, and he has confirmed that it will be possible to conduct a ballot and conclude a leadership election by Friday the 28th of October. So we should have a new leader in place before the fiscal statement, which will take place on the 31st. I'll be able to give you more details later on this afternoon.
Will members be included in the process?
Well, that is the expectation. The reason I've spoken to the party chairman and discussed the parameters of a process is to look at how we can make the whole thing happen, including the party being consulted by Friday next week.
Sir Graham, sorry.
This is a complete dumpster. It's certainly not a circumstance I would wish to see.
Sir Graham, will you have to make the threshold for nominations really high in order to flush out candidates? You just can't waste time on this now, can you?
I think these are details that will be clear later on. I haven't got any more detail to share with you now, but there will be some clarity later.
And how disappointed are you? Just one more question. How disappointed are you in this? This is the third Prime Minister in 4 months. The public must be looking at this thinking, what on earth is going on? This is the governing party.
Absolutely.
And they are not running the country.
And I think we're deeply conscious of the imperative in the national interest of resolving this clearly and quickly.
So they're not just be a general election, Sir Graham. They're not just be a general election. How can you continue to keep deciding the next Prime Minister?
Isn't a matter for me.
Will there definitely be 2 candidates going forward to the membership?
The party's rules say there will be 2 candidates.
好的，我们将会持续为您报道英国地区领导人卓慧思宣布辞职的最新消息。感谢你收看这一节即时新闻现场，晚安，我们再会。